Hey, Diva family. Welcome to a mini milestone for the podcast. We have achieved episode 30, which is at least worth a woohoo. And this episode is worth a woohoo all on its own because we have psychedelic icon Ann Harrison as our guest today. I first met Annie in the early 2000s when I stopped by her house in San Francisco with my dear friend Sylvia Tisson, who was MAP's first employee and who later worked for Arrowwood. Through that introduction, I understood Annie to be a cool, interesting person who was committed to drug reporting and safety education at a time when psychedelic use was still deeply underground. After that, I saw Annie at many psychedelic events over the years, several of which she had helped create, such as the Women's Visionary Congress and Take Three. Annie's work embodies a trauma-informed, heart-centered approach to psychedelic culture. She bridges the sacred and the practical, and she always emphasizes care and consent and community as foundational to the psychedelic role of transformation. So let me read you Annie's formal bio. Annie Oak Harrison is a journalist based in San Francisco. She has covered business, science, and politics for numerous news organizations, including Wired News, Fast Company, and several national public radio member stations. After working for several years as a technology reporter, Annie began writing about gray market economies. In 2020, Annie co-founded Lucid News, where she first served as managing editor. She's now editorial director and founding board member of the nonprofit Lucid News Community Media, which manages Lucid News. She has an MS in science reporting from the Columbia University School of Journalism. In 2007, Annie began co-creating companies and organizations under the name Annie Oak. She founded the Women's Visionary Congress and co-founded its parent organization, the Women's Visionary Council, the first nonprofit for psychedelic women. Recognizing the need to provide a quiet, comfortable space at music festivals, Annie created the Full Circle Tea House as a collaborative community art project. Annie's also the co-founder of Take Three Presents, a San Francisco-based event production company that produces immersive art experiences. A longtime public health activist, Annie develops risk reduction strategies for event organizers. Welcome to Psychedelic Divas, Annie. It is an honor to have you as a guest.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
So I just want to acknowledge that your formal bio does not do justice to the many roles you have played in the psychedelic world. And I'm thinking that maybe that's because your favorite roles are often in the background. And so I'm wondering if you agree with that thought, and if so, what makes you more comfortable, or maybe it's more powerful coming from that background place.
I am an editor, and editors typically are in the background supporting writers, reporters, um, and not taking the public role. And I do feel more comfortable in that space. I also prefer, in general, to be in a support position, creating systems and services that many people can enjoy, but I think I do prefer being a bit more in the background. I also, grew up at a very interesting time when people who were interested in psychedelics were often targeted, especially women, for legal and social retribution, legal prosecution in some cases. And so it's, in a sense, been a sort of a survival strategy for people of my generation to be a little bit more quiet and be effective, but also not draw too much attention sometimes to oneself and just get the work done, right?
Well, you certainly have done a lot of work. Before we started, we were talking that you have played a major, deep role in three different areas in the psychedelic world. So there's event creation and reporting and harm reduction, and we're going to talk about all of those. But any one single person could have, that would have been a lifetime's worth of work. And you have woven all three of these together, which is why I call you a psychedelic icon. And I know that everybody in the Bay Area would agree with me. But that's why I talk about the background, because I would say that most people outside of our little Bay Area bubble are like, no, wait, who is that?
Hmm. We're in an age where people develop their personal brands and they go out of their way to be as public and out there as possible. And that's great. Sometimes that serves you and sometimes it does not. And I come from a lineage where I'm more interested in playing a community role, being part of collaborative efforts, certainly offering my thoughts and my contributions, but sometimes just stepping back and being less visible. And I can talk a little bit about my own lineage here, but that sometimes serves you well, right? When you're coming from more of an underground culture, as I do. And so I think that's left its imprint on me.
Well, let's talk about that culture. So tell us a little bit about your psychedelic origin story. You mentioned lineages, and I love that word because of the depth and the honoring that it incurs. And so, what would you say were the biggest influencers in your psychedelic journey? And how would you describe your psychedelic lineage?
My first exposure to psychedelics was through older psychonauts who really took me under their wing and watched over me during my early explorations. And I was lucky enough to have responsible people around me who really cared about my well-being. So I've had a very fortunate life. I've been lucky in that way. I was also a young deadhead in the 1970s, and I saw those Grateful Dead shows and the community that formed around the band and how they looked after one another. I saw how the parking lot medics took care of that roving community that followed the dead, and especially looked after young and vulnerable people who were at that time considered real social outsiders and who sometimes didn't have access to health care and were constantly under pressure by law enforcement. I also had some early experiences with the Rainbow family, who brought large groups of people to camp on public lands without a permit and had to deal with a lot of police activity. And while nobody was officially in charge, of course, the Rainbow family had a very sophisticated safety team that mediated conflict and evacuated injured people and did ambulance handoffs and kept track of people in custody if they were arrested. And so I really saw that community in action, taking care of community members and doing it really in their own very creative way. And then as I got older, I took part in the Oregon Country Fair and got to do some training with Whitebird, their in-house medical team that cares for people at that event. And they also run an independent, year-round clinic that really help pioneer medical care for unsheltered people also in Oregon. So I saw these medical professionals providing a really exceptional level of care to people having psychedelic experiences and tend to their physical and psychological and emotional health as well. And so again, I really associated psychedelics and psychedelic care with community settings as opposed to, say, clinical settings, right? Because that was my own background and lineage growing up. And then I went to Burning Man for the first time in 1996 as a business reporter, which was a
Who
great
who are you
assignment.
writing for?
I was writing at the time for the Boston Business Journal. Well, I was a business reporter for a long time. Imagine a business reporter showing up at Burning Man. It was actually a great assignment. And I saw the Black Rock Rangers really providing support, to participants. And I later became a ranger. And I saw how they worked with the medics on site and with the crisis intervention teams that provided psychological support and care to people having sometimes challenging psychedelic experiences in a very different and difficult physical environment where people had to deal with extremes of heat and cold and dust storms and large pieces of art and moving vehicles and other kinds of hazards. By about 2011, I was a pretty seasoned older person who had a fair bit of experience learning from and participating in psychedelic communities of different kinds. And I wanted to take all that experience and make a contribution of my own and bring that knowledge and along with me in my own lineage. So that year, I created what I called the Full Circle Tea House, which you mentioned. I had observed that there were very few social spaces at Burning Man then that were not bars where I could go after doing my ranger shift and feel safe, and just kick back. And really, I just wanted to lie on soft pillows with my friends and drink tea. So
Isn't
in
that what we all want
2011,
at a certain point at
I,
Burning Man?
I think so. I do. And so in 2011, I started the Full Circle Tea House and had this mad idea to try to staff it 24/7 for a week at Burning Man. I mean, it's just bonkers, right? What I really felt like the biggest issues I saw at Burning Man for people's well-being, as a ranger, were exhaustion, dehydration, and loneliness. And I thought, well, if I, as an artist, and I do consider myself an artist, could create a piece of art that could address all three of those things, then maybe we could prevent a lot of issues down the road that the rangers and medics and crisis intervention teams would have to deal with. And so I wanted to make a contribution, to the well-being of burners. So I created a tea bar out of scrap plywood and, got an artist named Koa, who's an amazing guy, to decorate it with beautiful relief carvings and collected oriental rugs and pillows.
Oh, the tea
Tea.
house it's gorgeous. Yeah, there's no question. You walk into it and you're like, oh, your whole nervous system just down regulates, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna spend some time here.
Yes, that was the idea. Really, I created it for myself and my friends, as an artist. And I wanted to share that feeling with other people. And I got great support and help from like, my friend Oshan Cook, who ran another tea house at San Francisco at that time and sold me my first tea gear. And tea houses are ancient community spaces in many cultures, and I had just adapted mine for the physical environment at Burning Man. So I ended up founding a Burning Man camp to support the tea house, which I called Soft Landing. And before I knew it, I was running a large Burning Man camp that grew to more than 100 people and a 24-hour tea house that gave away water and, provided a place for people to sleep and rest that was safe and they could hydrate and get water and get out of the dust storms. And I feel really good about that piece of art. I do. It's now a collective based in West Oakland, and that anybody can join the collective and learn how to serve tea and check out all the gear and go serve at a party. And I go to parties and I see the tea house, and there it is.
And there it is. I go to
Uh,
parties and see the tea house and think of you. And I mean, I want to tell.
uh,
I have a story to tell. It's a harm reduction tea house story. It's the first time my husband
mm,
went to Burning Man. So my first year at Burning Man was 2000. We got together, I think, in 2005. So maybe this was 2005 or 2006 was his first year. And I had been invited to speak on a panel about drug education, and we were going to leave after the burn. So this is Saturday night. So Saturday afternoon, I was doing that. So my sweetie, who what a sweetheart. He's like, I'll break camp, okay. So he broke our camp down, and I mean, we had pulled all the individual stuff and got all that, but he broke down the tent and the Costco barn that was over top of it and packed the car and all of that. And since it was his first year, he did the rookie mistake of not leaving water out. Water is the last thing you pack. When or it's the first thing you unpack and the last thing you pack when you're setting up camp at Burning Man. And he ended up dehydrated, but I wasn't there, so I didn't know this. And we met up afterwards, and we walked out to the burn, and we're having a great time, and we're going to leave afterwards. And I think he took a hit of pot, and all of a sudden he looked at me, and his eyes rolled back, and he just crumpled. And I'm like, oh my God. I mean, he is out cold. And so I'm okay, Rangers, Rangers, and people. I mean, within like 30 seconds, someone had found us a ranger because there's so many of them around. I mean, we were like, we're jammed in for the burn, right? But boom, we got rangers coming. He's coming too, and I realize we don't, me as well. We don't really have enough water on us to hydrate him properly and stay out here. So I'm like, our camp is done. Everybody's gone. All those resources are gone. And I'm like, I'm out here at the man. I'm like, what? The tea house. The tea house has water. And I'm like, stay. Make my friends make sure that you're staying with him. And I run to the tea house because my bike is on the car. I'm running. Run to the tea house, go in the back, find the water, refill both of our containers, and run back and hydrate him. And we watched the burn, and then I drove us to Reno where we had a hotel that night. But that's harm reduction, rangers, water. Like you are a core. You have you built and became and then like released a core service to the community. We're teaching the importance of harm reduction from everything that you've learned.
Oh, that's a beautiful story. Thank you. I love stories like that. There is, I do believe in radical self-reliance,
Yep.
one of the Burning Man principles, but I also believe in community support. And just the act of giving away water was pretty radical,
Pretty.
when we
Yep.
first started doing it. We had to buy it, out
Yeah.
there on the playa and have it delivered.
Yep.
And I feel really good about that. So I'm delighted to hear that story.
And for those who haven't gone to Burning Man, there's nothing you can buy out there except ice, coffee,
Mhm.
lemonade, tea. Anything else that they sell at the cafe? Hot chocolate, I think.
They closed down the cafe.
No, I haven't. I haven't been since COVID.
Yeah.
Wow. Anyway, now the only thing you can buy at Burning Man, I'm assuming, is ice. You cannot buy water at Burning Man.
No, you can't.
Liquid gold, and you cannot buy it. So it's an
Yeah.
amazing gift that you offer. Hey, fellow explorers. Thoughtful planning and preparation is the foundation of any successful psychedelic journey. And if something does go wrong, knowing how to navigate that difficult space is essential. That's why I wrote my psychedelic safety guide, including what to do when things go wrong. It's filled with tips and tools for keeping you and your friends as safe as possible. You'll find it at our website, psychedelicdivas.com. Please, go get it, read it, and share it. The more we all know, the safer we can keep each other. Let's talk about harm reduction. So, you have a through line of harm reduction across many psychedelic gatherings. So, how would you say harm reduction has evolved over the last few decades?
Well, it's evolved significantly. About the time that I was being trained as a ranger,
So,
I
about what year
I
was that?
also co oh, this would have been around 2008, maybe 2007. I also co-founded another psychedelic community called the Women's Visionary Council, which you mentioned, which I co-created with Carolyn Mountain Girl Garcia, one of the original Merry Pranksters, which I definitely will take as part of my own lineage because she was one of my mentors. And I also co-created it with Maria Mangini, a member of the Hog Farm community, who ran a community care and support tent at Woodstock and then went to go create the large land-based community north of San Francisco, the Hog Farm, Black Oak Ranch. By the mid 1990s, I had moved to San Francisco and was working as a tech reporter to cover the first dot-com boom. And I had the honor of meeting many senior psychedelic women in the Bay Area. And in the early 2000s, we noticed that women were being really excluded from conferences that discussed psychedelics. And I was really especially struck by this when I was hired by Wired News to go cover Albert Hoffman's 100th birthday party in Basel, Switzerland.
Which
In two,
I was gonna go to and then didn't quite have enough
uh,
money, and it's one of my big regrets.
oh my gosh, it was quite a thing. It was in 2006, and of the 80 or so speakers, only about four of them were women. And we were all caucusing in the hallways, going, "What the heck is going on?" Myself and other women who were interested in psychedelics felt that we're really being excluded, despite the fact that so many women who worked with psychedelics as researchers or chemists or policy advocates or artists or spiritual leaders were really, doing interesting and important work. So in 2008, the three of us formed the Women's Visionary Council, the first women's psychedelic nonprofit organization. I remember creating a bail fund for us at the time, just in case we were targeted for just exercising our First Amendment rights to speak and gather. But the WVC, the Women's Visionary Council, started to host the Women's Visionary Congress, which I started in 2007 to really platform the foremost women in the field, including many women who are both, who then were pioneers and are now really prominent leaders in the field, including ethnobotanist Kat Harrison and artist Martina Hoffman, Anne and Sasha Shulgin, Amy Emerson of MAP. She worked for MAPS for a long time, Earth and Fire, Arrowwood, Bela Bhatti, many other people. And we also gave a lot of up and coming women in the field their first chance to really present their work in a supportive and respectful space. And the WVC made a big impact on the acceptance and inclusion of women in the field of psychedelics, where there are now many female leaders, of course. And we brought forward important conversations about the abuse of women and people of other genders and ceremonial and social spaces where psychedelics are used. And we amplified the work of real leading thinkers and community organizers. We also founded Tram Day to celebrate the uncredited work of Susie Ramstein, who was Albert Hoffman's lab assistant, who accompanied him home on his famous bicycle ride.
The first psychedelic
Um,
sitter.
yes, the first, well, at least LSD psychedelic sitter.
True.
The WVC now has an annual Tram Day celebration and also other events that now promote the work of elders in the community. Having succeeded in bringing more women into prominence in the psychedelic field, the WVC has really shifted its focus to amplifying the voices of elders and supporting the transfer of intergenerational knowledge, which is really critical at this moment when elders are passing and this knowledge is lost. And we're really at a place in dialogue about psychedelics where this wisdom and knowledge is needed to provide context and grounding. And
Absolutely.
mm,
It's why I'm doing
mhm.
this podcast.
Thank you, Carla, for doing that. You can go to the WBC website at visionarycongress.org to review articles on psychic self-defense, safety protocols for event and community organizers, best practices for risk reduction, safety tips for those participating in ceremonies that use psychedelic substances, and consider donating. When you go to the site, we found that it's sometimes difficult for people in this field to value elders and the wisdom that they have to share. And we do this at our peril, really. Most traditional societies venerate elders, and we should as well. I do not consider myself an elder. I consider people in their 70s and 80s elders, but I am perhaps a wisdom keeper, and I am in the service of elders. And I feel strongly that we should listen carefully to them at this moment in history.
Well, actually, I specifically want to call out because I've mentioned in the podcast that I have two elders my lineage includes two elders, and I talked mostly about Ralph, but I haven't talked about Ricky Coddington because she didn't want her name shared.
Mm.
And Ricky is currently in hospice. She has been a beneficiary of money from the Women's Visionary Congress Elder Fund, and she's not actively dying. She's still here. In fact, I just made plans. I'm going to go visit her at the end of this month with another sister. So we're going to go and just pay tribute and connect with Ricky at this end time in her life. But resources are still needed for her and her husband Jack's caretaking, and so I'm going to have a link to that in the show notes of anybody who wants to be able to donate in their name. I know that I would really appreciate it. And Ricky, she I've spoken about her, but her lineage, was very distinct from Ralph's, and it's really the combination of the two of them that created who I am. Is that interweaving of deeply feminine is what I really what I got from Ricky. We would not be doing Psychedelic Divas without Ricky's influence, and so
Mm.
I want to call her forth and just really honor her voice and her wisdom. And she was trained by Leo Zeff, who was there's a book called The Secret Chief. He was the secret chief,
Yes.
and but she herself had other lineage members that she learned from. It's just she's led an amazing life, and not only that, a black woman. She's in her 90s now, and there just weren't that many black people in the psychedelic field, especially back then. So just recognizing and honoring her on so many levels, and
That's
I'm so
certainly
grateful
true.
that WPC is doing that.
Thank you. We had a really great event where we,
I was there.
as you were there, where
Uh-huh.
we honored Ricky and she stepped forward. Um,
They had her on a Zoom
and
call, and she was
Mhm.
interviewed by one of the board members of WVC, Patricia James. It's another
Yes,
sister of mine. Yeah.
yes, that was a very
It
special
was beautiful.
gathering.
I
It
was so
was.
excited just to be able to see her.
Mm.
Um, so I want to. Well, first of all, I want to talk. I want to call out a resource because I don't think it gets a lot of amplification. That you had an important hand in creating. I think you might have been the lead editor of the Manual of Psychedelic Support. It was
Mhm.
something that was published in MAPS in 2017. There'll be a link to it in the show notes. So it's described as a practical guide to establishing and facilitating care services at music festivals and other events. So tell me a little bit about the creation of that and what did you learn that you think would be helpful to share with our listeners that went into that manual?
Yes, that manual that maps is sold. It's also for sale on Amazon. I think is an important resource. Many people have used it over the years to create their own psychedelic support teams. A lot of that knowledge that I offered in the chapters that I wrote and in the editing of the manual that I did really comes from my own experiences as an event producer. While I was building a tea house and running a Burning Man camp and a women's psychedelic nonprofit organization, I got more involved in event production and other forms of psychedelic risk reduction. I prefer the term risk reduction because I think some psychedelic use is risky, but not all of it is harmful. So by about this time, I was producing the Women's Visionary Congress event at various locations and running the tea house. And one night at Burning Man, as they say, I took a very long walk with two other people who were interested in producing immersive art events. And the two of us were already running large Burning Man camps and doing large scale logistics and managing teams of people and we thought, well, we know enough to do our own art parties. And so we had our own private art party in Mendocino County in the summer of 2013. And shortly after that, we formed Take Three Presents, which is a production company that creates private, large, immersive art parties. And I founded the safety department and created a team of rangers based on what I had learned as a Burning Man ranger. It was great training. And I hired medics and created a crisis intervention team and developed a quiet space, where people could go for focused care, just like they did at the sanctuary space at Burning Man, which is run by the Rangers. I really co founded Take Three because I really wanted to develop new forms of risk reduction that raised the bar for other people doing events. And a lot of people who come to Take Three events are also event producers. So we could have a broader influence. And one of my non negotiable demands is that we not sell or serve alcohol. I
Hmm.
didn't want our
Yep.
business model, to be based on selling inferior drugs to people we loved. So the Full Circle Tea House, instead of a bar, became our social center and remains so even now. And it also
Yep.
means that we made very little money for many, many years
Right.
with Take Three because we're not selling alcohol. I also insisted that Take
Or
Three
drugs.
events or drugs. That's right. I also insisted that Take Three events be private and have a sponsorship system, which is an old idea. It helps curate the community and keeps people accountable to those who invited them. I also
So
insisted that
let's.
we
I want
take
to talk
more.
about that for a second because
Sure.
you have to be invited by someone. Then
Hmm.
you are attached to that person. If you misbehave, they're responsible for you. So that keeps
Yes.
people from just going, "Oh yeah, you should come to this." To whoever they're like, "Oh no, maybe I'm going to invite you because you may not behave well, and then I'm going to get in trouble. Then I can lose my ticket and my return." And so I think that's actually been a critical part of keeping the, I mean, I've been to many of those events, the really superior high quality of who shows up and also their capability of remaining upright and, good citizens. And I think that's a really important piece. I want to call that out.
Yes, thank you. I think it's important too. You're not going to invite somebody who's going to cause trouble and make you look bad. It's a very effective
And we all have
accountability.
those friends.
Yes, yes. So there were some other things that I really wanted to do with Take Three, in addition to the sponsorship system. I also insisted that we take the entire community off of social media,
Hmm.
which I think is our largest collective art project.
Yeah.
I had covered privacy and security issues as a tech reporter, and I wanted to hold up the value of privacy and create transformational spaces where people were not commodified and end up in someone's Instagram feed as content. And we still do that. And there's very little information about Take Three online. And that approach has really helped us create our own narrative within the community instead of participating in a surveillance economy and having our narrative fed back to us, right? I think that's been important. I also did three more things as a Take Three co-founder that I think have made a big impact on community safety at Take Three and other events inspired by what we've done. And I will say I was inspired by the Cosmic Care team at the Boom Festival in Portugal to bring in free anonymous drug checking services so that people could test their substances and make sure they're not ingesting something they didn't plan on ingesting or ingest a substance adulterated with fentanyl,
Hmm.
which could be fatal, of course. Of course, Portugal is a decrim environment, and we are not quite there in the U.S. So it required some courage, right, to do that. But I think it was a moral imperative, honestly. Um, I also created a group of year-round mediators drawn from the Take Three community and created protocols for addressing conflicts in the community. This is a part of risk reduction that people don't talk about. I wanted to make sure there was a system for people to bring their concerns to a group of mediators from within their community that reflected their own culture. And this group has now been operating for about 7 years. And if people violate our community agreements, then we remove them from our list. I wanted to create a system that was not based on impunity, where people were held accountable for their actions, because I saw conflict really blowing apart communities over and over. And I think this is a form of risk reduction that is underappreciated. And finally, I wanted to make sure that I had a succession plan so that I could hand off the safety department to somebody that I had trained who understood the culture from inside. And 2 years ago, I did this and I stepped back from managing the safety department. Take Three is now a nonprofit organization, and I still run the crisis intervention team, which provides psychological support to people who need that direct care. And I serve as a senior advisor to Take Three leadership and sit in on the leadership meetings. So I think it's important, whatever you're doing in this space or in other spaces, to create a succession plan. And I did this with the WBC as well, where I served as acting executive director until I handed off that role. It's really important. So if you're out there creating something, create a succession plan to really go with your project so that you can hand it off and so it can live beyond you. And creating a succession plan is also really important because it frees you to pursue new projects. And I consider myself an artist, and most artists don't want to keep repeating themselves, and you want to create new things. And as I said, the Full Circle Tea House is now run by a collective. My Burning Man camp, Soft Landing, is on its fourth generation of leaders. Um, and and it's important that you create something that can be self-sustaining. I do believe that. I'm a business reporter. I like to see self-sustaining organizations. But doing succession plans also frees you up, and it really freed me up to focus on my most recent project, which is Lucid News. And
Well, hang on. Before we get to Lucid News, I wanted before we wrap from Take Three, I've heard stories about the origin of the name Take Three. Would you care to share the origin of the name Take Three?
no, no,
Great.
no.
I honor that
Some
response.
things are
Yep.
are
Not
important
meant to be shared.
to just hold. No, it's part of community lore, and communities and people have a right to hold their own stories privately, right? Within their community, or just say, that's a private issue.
I,
It's like
that's a
asking people what kind of substances they do. I'm like, that's a private question. It's like, how do you pray? It's people have a right to a zone of privacy, and so do communities.
no.
Yeah.
That's a lovely answer. I think that's perfect. I want to talk a little bit about before again we're going to move to lucid news, but before we go there, I want to just talk about like sort of the shift in risk reduction issues that are currently facing the psychedelic event world. And I want to talk a little bit about the rise of ketamine at psychedelic events and how
Mhm.
that has shown up in a not so positive way. I heard you say once that you were here to serve the psychedelic world, not the dissociative world. So that's obviously something that's had a negative impact on the events you've served. Can we talk a little bit about that or?
Well, first of all, I want to say that, I'm a journalist and I believe in fact-based reporting. And the data supporting ketamine assisted therapy is very strong. And
Yes.
there is no question, based on the data, that people who work with ketamine in therapeutic environments can receive great benefit from that. And I think that's been demonstrated in the data and the scientific literature very
Totally
strongly.
agree.
Mhm. So
Yep.
there is a lot of personal, non-clinical, and non-therapeutic use of ketamine that takes place. It's relatively easy to get. It's relatively inexpensive. It's relatively short acting. It's become a substance many people do. I consider it, and it is, a dissociative and anesthetic, as opposed to a more classical
Hmm.
psychedelic, like psilocybin or LSD or uh, mescaline, for example. So I have seen it impact many different kinds of communities. um, when people are disassociated, they are not uh, as strongly associating with each other, right? And that impacts their relationships, that impacts the art they make, that impacts how they see the world. And certainly, if you're doing large amounts of ketamine in a more habitual way, it can have very negative impacts on your bladder. That's been well documented. So it has some physical impact as well. And then there's the question of dependency. And I think there's more and more information coming out about ketamine dependencies and how to address and treat those types of issues and that kind of dependency. I'm going to be moderating a discussion at Shulgin Farm in March about ketamine, both its therapeutic benefits and concerns about dependency issues. And I really look forward to that conversation. I think it's an important conversation to have right now.
I think so too, which is why I brought that up. So thank you. Thank you for creating that. All right, let's go to your third role that you hold in the psychedelic world. There's also many smaller roles, but we're talking about the big three right now. I want to talk about your role as a drug reporter. Then that's been a constant since I've known you. And I use the word drug rather than psychedelics because you were writing about marijuana for Narco News back in the early 2000s, which is, I think, when I met you. And
Mm.
now marijuana's moved more to the back burner and psychedelics are all the reporting rage. So will you walk us through your journey as a drug reporter from those early days with Narco News and then the founding of Lucid News, which is an amazing resource, and we will have a link to it in the show notes.
Thank you for doing that. Narco News was really a journalism school for people who wanted to cover the narco trade and in Mexico and other places. And it was founded by a friend of mine by the name of Al Giordano. And he recruited me and other journalists to go down to Mexico and other places and both teach people how to cover this trade and also learn from the journalists and editors who worked in newspapers and other media organizations in Mexico and other places who took many greater risks than we ever did as people coming from the US. And that was quite an experience. I also worked for 5 years for the Bay Guardian here in San Francisco, a weekly in San Francisco, and covered the cannabis business. Went to many grows and uh, wrote about the rise of medical cannabis and the dispensary system, and covered many court cases in federal court here in San Francisco where people were prosecuted and sentenced and sometimes sent to prison for being involved in the cannabis business. Those were hard years, really the height of the drug war at that time. It's of course evolved to encompass other things, but there was real suffering and a real impact on people's lives. And then, of course, with more decrim movements in California and elsewhere, we've really seen a huge shift, right, in people's approach to cannabis. But it prepared me well, I think, to cover psychedelics. I co-founded Lucid News just before the pandemic in 2020. I was recruited by the group of reporters, mostly based in New York, that founded Lucid because I'm trained as a science journalist. And I've always been interested in research in the psychedelic field. I became managing editor and I began to train reporters to cover this field accurately and write balanced and carefully sourced news stories. And I also work with opinion writers who submit essays to Luce. And I really like working with writers. I really enjoy my work as an editor, and it brings me great joy to see a writer produce a really strong piece of reporting or develop their voice as an essayist. In the spring of 2024, just as I was handing off my duties at Take Three as the head of the safety department, one of our main co-founders at Lucid News, Ken Jordan, passed away unexpectedly, and I took over the news service as editorial director. I It had been such a big project that I just could not let it die. We had more than 600 fact-based stories that we had reported and were part of our archive. We had this big community of writers and reporters that we worked with all over the world. So I relaunched the organization as a nonprofit called Lucid News Community Media, and we continue to publish and work with our large community of reporters and writers. and really create the kind of journalism that we're proud of. We're really upholding, I think, a gold standard of journalism to meet the needs of readers who really want accurate, balanced information. And if you'd like to contribute as a writer or a reporter or make a tax exempt donation to Lucid News, you can reach me at ANN at lucid.news and go to our site, www.lucid.news, and really see what we've been doing since 2020. I'm now working towards training editors to eventually take over my role at Lucid so that I can be a contributing editor. I'd like to work on a new edition of the Manual of Psychedelic Support. And I think that's a piece of important resource information that should be updated because we put it out in 2017. So I also am going to work more closely with the Zendo project, which was really founded by mental health professionals and has trained thousands of
Mm-hmm.
sitters to care for people at Burning Man and other events who need compassionate care. And it also offers professional harm reduction education, risk reduction education to communities and organizations to transform difficult psychedelic experiences and other complex emotions into real opportunities for learning and growth. And the Zendo was inspired by the Full Circle Tea House. When I created the tea house, Rick Doblin, the founder of MAP, said, I like what you're doing. We should create something called maybe the Zendo. And I said, Rick, you go do that. Rick, that's a great idea.
I got
And
enough.
they did.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, great idea. I've been a Zendo trainer and consultant. I've also consulted for the Fireside Project and the Global Psychedelic Societies and many other groups in this space. And I really want to continue to be a productive and useful community member. You can see outside my window. This is Haight-Ashbury. I live in the Haight, America's first psychedelic neighborhood. I've lived here for more than 30 years. Many people came into our neighborhood this past week to honor Bob Weir, member of the Grateful Dead, after his passing, and that felt like a really beautiful community moment. And I'm interested in supporting that type of community action. I'm also interested in advocating for groups that support health and longevity. I have a yoga practice. I prioritize exercise and good nutrition and sleep, and I would like to model healthy living for others in addition to being good psychedelic citizens. Yeah.
Well, and you need, especially as we age, you need all of that in order to have stamina, in order to not be wiped out, in order to actually stay upright. You need all of those underlying health practices to maintain a psychedelic practice as you age. Because when you're in your 20s, you can just keep burning through, hot and bright and maybe into your 40s. But after that, it starts taking a toll. And all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute. You might find yourselves wandering the back of a CVS looking for Ensure bottles.
Yes,
I may or may
yes.
not have personal experience
That's
with
right.
that.
If you're going to be a psychonaut for 50 years and stay up late, or up all night,
Right.
you need a wellness practice, a
Yes.
really full-on wellness practice
Yes,
that
absolutely.
prioritizes all the right things, sleep, education, educating yourself about what you need for exercise or nutrition. And that's really important, right?
It
It
is.
just is.
It just is. And you don't realize it until all of a sudden it just really hits you and you're like, oh, wow, okay, there's consequences now. There didn't used to be consequences. Now there's consequences.
Yes,
Um,
there are.
I'm curious, what stories are most alive for you right now in the psychedelic movement? What are you excited to write about or think about or, learn more about?
Gosh, breaking news right now. I'm going to be posting something about the governor of New Jersey just signing a bill into law about psychedelics and
Go New Jersey.
psilocybin assisted therapy. That's happening right now as we speak. I'll be editing that this evening and posting it today, probably.
Cool.
I'm very interested in ongoing policy developments on the state level. Certainly, there's a lot of that going on. We've just reported on the Texas Ibogaine Initiative, which devoted $50 million of public
Mm.
funding to do ibogaine research in Texas. And I think that's very interesting.
Fascinating.
Again,
Yep.
as the federal government perhaps steps back a little bit from funding research, it's been interesting to see the states step forward and do that. Some of the scientific research about ibogaine and other psychedelic substances is really fascinating. What the neuroscientists are learning about neurotransmitters and the actions of these materials, I find really fascinating. We'll be publishing some more about that the coming week or so. We just published an op-ed by Ismail Ali, one of the co-executive directors of MAPS, about what he sees in the next year that people should pay attention to. We're certainly interested in tracking community organizations like MAPS, and we've been doing that for a long time. Very interested in what's going on out there in the larger world. We're about to publish a story about the Thai Psychedelic Society. What's going on in Thailand? What do people interested in psychedelics in Thailand talk about? What are their concerns? What are their interests? And one of our reporters will be filing a piece to us this week about that, and that's really exciting to see. So there's so much happening. Um, we've also been tracking, of course, geopolitical issues with the military attacks on the alleged drug boats and the political implications of that. We've had one of our reporters covering that issue and questions about alleged drug smuggling from Venezuela and Colombia, etc. So we track the geopolitical implications of the ongoing war on drugs and that escalation, which apparently is happening right now. So there's a lot to keep track of. Yeah.
And where's California these days? Not at the forefront.
Not quite at the forefront. We'll see. It's still to be seen, I would say. But there's interesting things happening culturally. Chacruna is going to be hosting a psychedelic culture conference in the next couple of months here in San Francisco. And, I will say that all the thousands of deadheads from around the world who came to the Haight and had a beautiful community memorial for Bob Weir in
Mm-hmm.
front of San Francisco City Hall with many people speaking, including Nancy Pelosi. Uh, that was quite a moment. And it was an opportunity to remember, how LSD in particular, this neighborhood of Haight-Ashbury, San Francisco, as a city, really have changed culture. Peace and love is a real thing. And we saw that really play out in the memorial activities to Bob Weir. We went down to the Fillmore and paid our respects. There was a show at the Warfield. That culture, that community that the music created, that feeling of taking care of one another, of treating one another with kindness, with respect, of restraint by the police. There were big crowds of people
Mm.
right on Haight Street, and the police showed up and said, "Please step back a little bit from the street. We don't want you to get hurt." And they were very, very respectful, actually. And so it's an opportunity to really reflect on what's possible, to see a community that works together with each other in a harmonious way and to understand how profound cultural impact that was in the 60s and the echoes, of that cultural impact that continue to this day. People sometimes are dismissive and they say, when the hippies lived in the hate. And I always say, we're just techno hippies now. But I'm just online all over the world. So it's important to understand the importance of those values and the sweetness and the kindness and the mutual respect that kind of culture really brought forward and the creativity that psychedelics can bring to communities. There are many businesses still on Haight Street who are still profiting from that, and people come from all over the world to the Haight to have a little taste of that magic.
And I think that's the perfect peace, love, and magic in the hate. I think that's the perfect note to end on. Annie, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for all of your service to the world of psychedelics. It has been important and deep, and it's really been quite the commitment. And I just really want to honor that and bring you, a little bit more forward. You're pretty forward, but like a little more forward from that place in the background that we talked about that I think you like to hang out in.
Well, thank you, Carla. It's been a real honor to be here and to talk with you today. Thank you for inviting me, and I wish you a beautiful rest of your day.
Oh, thank you. And I want to thank you all for listening. And thank you for helping me to grow the podcast. It is happening because of you. Thank you for sharing and reviewing and talking about it with your friends. And if you want, you can follow us on Instagram at Psychedelic Divas. And just in general, I just really so appreciate that you guys are the feedback that I'm getting and that this seems to be resonating for you. So thank you for letting me know that. It's so appreciated. Thank you to everyone and to you, Annie, for being a part of this growth journey. See you next time.